Evelyn sat on her front porch, watching the last colors of autumn settle across the quiet street. The trees were painted in shades of gold and deep red, their leaves scattering across the lawn as the wind whispered through. She held her cup of tea close, letting its warmth steady her thoughts. Saturdays had always been special to her, but today felt different. Her grandson Daniel had called that morning asking if he could come over. His voice sounded careful, softer than usual, as if there was something hidden beneath the words. Evelyn brushed it off at first, thinking maybe he was tired from work or simply wanted to see her. Still, a small part of her sensed that something more was waiting behind that call. When his car finally pulled into the driveway, Evelyn rose to greet him, her smile wide and familiar. Daniel was tall now, with the kind of presence that made people notice him. But to her, he would always be the boy who used to run across her garden barefoot, laughing as though the world had no weight. As he stepped out of the car, she saw the smile she knew so well. But there was something in his eyes, something he was trying to hide. They walked inside, the old wooden floor creaking softly under their steps. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and fresh bread she had baked earlier, a habit she never let go of. Daniel sat at the table, his shoulders a little tense, his hands tapping lightly on the wood as if he was keeping rhythm with thoughts he couldn't share yet. Evelyn placed a mug of coffee in front of him, the way she always did. She sat across from him, waiting for him to relax, to open up. For a while they spoke about ordinary things. Work, the city, the weather turning colder. Daniel laughed when she teased him about forgetting his coat last winter. And she smiled, grateful for the sound of his laughter filling the room again. But as she watched him, Evelyn could tell his mind wasn't on the small talk. He looked distracted, as though every word he spoke was only a cover for what he really wanted to say. She studied him closely. The way he twisted his mug in his hands, the way his gaze kept dropping to the table, never quite meeting hers for long. These weren't the habits of a man simply visiting his grandmother for coffee. Evelyn's heart grew curious and a little worried. Something was pressing on him, and she wasn't sure if he was ready to share it. Then Daniel's hand stilled. He took a slow breath, almost as if he had been building up the courage all afternoon. His voice, when it came, was quieter than she expected. "Grandma," he said, looking up at her at last, his eyes holding something raw, something almost pleading. "Can I ask you something I've never asked anyone before?" The words caught her off guard. Evelyn felt her chest tighten, her heart skipping in a way she hadn't expected. This wasn't the usual question about recipes, advice on work, or family memories. His tone carried weight, as if behind it rested years of unspoken feelings. She leaned forward, her face soft but her thoughts racing. What could he possibly be holding back? Why did he look as though saying the words themselves might break him? In that moment, Evelyn realized this visit was not about casual company or escaping the noise of the city. Daniel hadn't come for fresh bread or warm coffee. He had come for something else, something important, something he had carried with him for too long. And as she met his steady, searching eyes, she understood that whatever question was about to leave his lips would change the rhythm of their conversation forever. Evelyn's heart gave a small tremor as she heard her grandson's voice, so steady yet filled with unease. She forced a calm smile and answered softly, "Of course, darling. You can ask me anything." Her words were gentle, but inside she was bracing herself. She had raised children, she had held secrets, and she had lived through moments where a single question could shift the course of life. This felt like one of those moments. Daniel didn't speak right away. He stared at the steam rising from his coffee, his fingers circling the rim of the mug as if drawing courage from its warmth. His jaw tightened, then loosened. Evelyn noticed every detail. She always noticed. It was part of being a grandmother, part of knowing the rhythm of someone's soul just by how they held themselves. She waited, giving him the silence he needed. Finally, he spoke. His words were quiet, almost fragile. "Did you ever love someone so much that you felt like your heart couldn't hold it?" Evelyn froze. The question struck her like a wave, carrying her backward through years she had locked away. She hadn't expected him to ask something so personal, so heavy. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. She watched Daniel's face, his seriousness, his vulnerability, and realized he wasn't asking casually. This was coming from a place of real feeling, of real pain. She placed her hand on the table, steadying herself. Her voice came out calm, though her chest ached. "Yes, Daniel, I did." His head lifted quickly, eyes wide, as if her answer had opened a door he never knew existed. Daniel had never heard his grandmother speak like this. To him, she had always been steady, loving, wise, but this was different. This was a glimpse into a part of her life he had never touched. Who was it? He asked, his voice careful, almost reverent. Evelyn's breath caught. She hadn't spoken his name in years, not out loud, not even to herself when the nights were long and memories tried to return. She turned her gaze toward the window, the falling leaves catching her attention as if they were safer to look at than her grandson's eager face. "That's a long story," she said softly. Daniel leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please, tell me. I want to know." The way he said it, the honesty in his tone, touched something deep inside her. She could see in his eyes that he wasn't asking out of curiosity alone. He needed her answer for his own reasons, reasons he hadn't yet revealed. And in that instant, she realized his question wasn't just about her past, it was about his present. Memories stirred within her, filling the silence between them. She thought of evenings when her heart had raced at the sound of a familiar voice, of letters folded and refolded until the paper wore thin, of a love that had burned bright but had been swept away by the tides of life. She could feel it all again, and the weight of it pressed against her chest. Daniel studied her face, reading every flicker of expression. He had grown up admiring her strength, but now he saw something else's tenderness, a hidden sorrow. His own heart began to ache with the thought that she, too, had once carried a love so fierce it nearly broke her. "Grandma," he said carefully, "was it before Grandpa?" Evelyn turned back to him, her eyes glistening with unspoken truths. She gave a small, knowing smile, the kind that carried both sadness and sweetness. "Yes, before him." Daniel didn't move, didn't speak. He sat in silence, absorbing her words. For the first time in his life, he realized his grandmother had lived through the same feelings that now weighed on him. Love, longing, heartbreak. They were not just his struggles. They had been hers too. The kitchen grew quiet except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Evelyn folded her hands together, steadying herself as she prepared to continue. She wasn't sure how much to share, how deep to go, but she knew she couldn't leave his question unanswered. His eyes were searching her, begging her to help him understand something he couldn't carry alone. "Yes, Daniel," she said softly, her voice almost trembling. "I love someone with all of my heart so deeply that it felt impossible to contain. And though life moved on, a piece of that love never left me." Daniel's throat tightened. He swallowed hard, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. He had expected an answer, but not one so raw, so open. He finally whispered, "That's exactly how I feel about someone right now." Evelyn's eyes widened slightly. The weight of his words pressed against her chest. In that moment, the pieces fell into place. She understood why he had come, why his voice had sounded different on the phone, why he had looked so restless since stepping through the door. Her heart filled with both tenderness and worry. She reached across the table and laid her hand gently on his. "Tell me, Daniel, who is she?" His lips parted, as though he wanted to speak. His eyes softened, but before he could form the words, his phone buzzed on the table. The sound startled them both. Daniel looked down, glanced at the screen, and in an instant, the light in his eyes dimmed. He pressed his lips together, sliding the phone back into his pocket, but his posture changed. He seemed torn, caught between what he wanted to say and what he felt able to reveal. Evelyn's heart ached as she watched the conflict in his face. I'll tell you soon," he said quietly, pushing back his chair. His voice was heavy with something unsaid, as if the secret pressed harder on him the longer he stayed. "I promise, Grandma, just not yet." Evelyn wanted to stop him, to press him gently, to make him stay and open his heart. But the look in his eyes told her it wasn't the right time. So she nodded, even though her own heart longed for answers. He gave her a small, grateful smile and kissed her cheek before leaving. The door closed softly behind him, and the house grew still once more. Evelyn sat at the table, staring at his untouched coffee, her heart full of questions that echoed into the quiet evening. Whatever he was holding inside was powerful, and she knew when he was ready, the truth would change both of their lives. Evelyn sat in her quiet kitchen long after Daniel had left, the silence wrapping around her like a blanket. She thought about his question, the way his voice had cracked with emotion, and the look in his eyes when he admitted he felt the same kind of love she once did. Memories that she had kept hidden for decades began to rise, pulling her back into a time she thought she had left behind. His name came back to her with a sharp clarity, Michael. She had been just a young woman when she met him, and the world had seemed brighter when he was near. He was charming, gentle, and made her laugh in a way no one else could. They had shared long walks by the lake, whispered dreams about the future, and promises that seemed unshakable. Evelyn had believed with all her heart that he would be her forever. But life, she knew too well, didn't always honor promises. Michael's family moved away suddenly. And though they tried to stay connected with letters, the words slowly grew fewer and fewer. She remembered waiting by the mailbox, clutching envelopes to her chest, rereading every line until the ink began to fade. But one day, the letters stopped. Silence replaced the rhythm of his words. Evelyn had waited, prayed, and hoped. But in time, she understood Michael was gone. Years later, she had seen him again. By then, her heart had tried to heal. But when she looked at him, every old feeling came flooding back. He smiled at her kindly, politely, and that was when she noticed the ring on his hand. He was married. He had moved on while she still carried the love like a shadow that would not leave. It was in that moment Evelyn realized some loves do not vanish, even when life pulls them apart. They stay quietly inside, tucked away where only the heart remembers. She had met George, her husband, not long after that. He had been steady, dependable, a man who made her feel safe. She had grown to love him in her own way deeply, faithfully, but there was always that small piece of her heart that belonged to Michael. George never knew. She never spoke of it. She built a family, raised her children, and devoted her life to being the wife and mother she wanted to be. Yet sometimes, when the nights were quiet, she would wonder what her life might have been if things had turned out differently. Now, as she sat remembering, Evelyn realized why Daniel's question had shaken her so deeply. He wasn't asking for curiosity's sake. He was living through the same struggles she once knew, the kind of love that is too big, too heavy, and sometimes too painful to carry alone. That was why his eyes had looked so desperate, why his words had trembled with unspoken truth. He wasn't just asking about her past. He was trying to understand his own. The next evening, Evelyn couldn't stop thinking about him. She wondered if he was eating, if he was sleeping, if he was holding back tears the way she once had. She prayed he would come back soon and tell her the rest, because she could see he was carrying something heavy in his heart. And just as she thought of him, the sound of a car pulling into her driveway broke the silence. Daniel stepped out, his face pale, his expression tired. He walked inside without much of a word and sat at the table again, the same spot he had occupied just 2 nights ago. Evelyn's heart squeezed at the sight of him. He looked like a man at war with himself. She poured him a cup of coffee, waiting for him to speak. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Finally, Daniel lifted his eyes to hers. "Grandma," he said softly, "I think I understand what you meant when you said love can stay with you, even when it can't be yours." Evelyn leaned closer, her voice steady but full of care. "Tell me, Daniel, who is it?" He pressed his lips together, his hands curling into fists on the table. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he exhaled slowly, as if releasing a weight he had been carrying too long. "Her name is Claire. She's been my best friend since college. I've loved her for years, but she doesn't know. And now, she's with someone else." Felon's breath caught. She could feel his pain as though it were her own. He was living the very heartache she once endured, loving someone who could never fully be his. She reached across the table, placing her hands gently over his. "Oh, Daniel," she whispered, "no wonder you asked me that question." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "I didn't know who else to talk to. I can't tell my parents, they wouldn't understand. But you, I thought maybe you would." Tears pricked at Evelyn's eyes, not just for his struggle, but for the way life seemed to echo itself across generations. She squeezed his hands, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "I understand more than you think. Love doesn't always follow the path we hope for. Sometimes it stays in our hearts even when we wish it wouldn't. But what you're feeling, Daniel, it's real. And it matters." For a moment, Daniel said nothing. He just sat there, staring at her with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. Evelyn could see the weight lifting slightly from his shoulders, though the pain still lingered. But before he could say more, his phone buzzed again. He glanced at it quickly, and his face fell. Evelyn saw it immediately, the conflict, the hesitation, the hurt. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, shaking his head. "I need to figure this out," he said quietly, "but I don't know how." Evelyn's chest tightened. She wanted to tell him everything, to pour out all her memories, to give him answers she wished someone had given her long ago. But she also knew some lessons had to be lived, not handed down. She reached across the table again, her touch firm but kind. "Then come back tomorrow," she said softly. "We'll talk more. You don't have to carry this alone." Daniel gave a small, tired smile, and for the first time in days, she saw a flicker of peace in his eyes. He nodded, rose from the chair, and hugged her tightly before leaving. As the door closed behind him, Evelyn sank into her seat, her heart torn between the past and the present. She had shared a piece of her own story, and now her grandson had begun to share his. She knew the journey ahead would not be easy for him. But she also knew he had finally opened the door to something he had been holding back for too long. And in that quiet kitchen, Evelyn whispered a promise to herself. This time, she would not let love's silence steal away the chance for truth. She would help Daniel find the courage she once lacked. 2 days later, Daniel returned. The afternoon was gray, the kind of day when clouds pressed low against the earth and the air felt heavy with secrets. Evelyn had been expecting him. She felt it in her bones. She had baked a small loaf of bread, not because she thought he'd be hungry, but because keeping her hands busy helped her calm the storm inside her heart. When she saw his car in the driveway, her breath caught. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped as though he had been carrying a weight too heavy for someone his age. He stepped inside without much of a greeting, his eyes finding hers almost immediately. There was no need for small talk. They both knew why he was here. Evelyn poured him coffee, her hands steady even though her heart raced. Daniel sat across from her in the same chair, but this time his face was different, more resolved, more raw. "I need to tell you everything," he said quietly, his voice worn but clear. "I can't keep it inside anymore." Evelyn nodded, encouraging him with silence. She folded her hands on the table and gave him her full attention. He drew a deep breath, his chest rising as though he were bracing for a storm. "Her name is Claire. We met in college. From the first day, she's been everything. We studied together, laughed about the silliest things, shared secrets nobody else knew. She's the one person who makes the world feel lighter just by being in it." He paused, his voice cracking. "But I never told her how I felt. I thought maybe one day I would, but I kept waiting for the right moment. And then she met someone else." Evelyn's heart ached. She could see the pain etched into every line of his face, hear it in every word. She remembered waiting by her own window for a letter that never came. Remembered the emptiness of loving someone who could never be hers. "She's with him now," Daniel continued, his fingers tightening around his mug. "I see the way she looks at him, and it kills me, Grandma. It feels like I missed my chance, like I let it all slip away. And now I don't know what to do. Should I stay quiet and just let her go? Or should I fight for her, even if it breaks me?" Evelyn felt the weight of his words settle in the air. She thought of Michael, of her silence, of the way her heart had carried that secret through all the years of her marriage, through every season of her life. She thought of the cost of never speaking, of wondering what if long after the chance was gone. She reached across the table and took Daniel's hands in hers. Her touch was firm, but her voice was soft and trembling with truth. Daniel, love is never simple. It doesn't follow rules, and it doesn't always wait for us to be ready. Sometimes it comes like a storm, and sometimes it slips away before we even know what it was. But listen to my silence is heavier than heartbreak. The only thing worse than losing love is never knowing if it could have been yours. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He looked at her as though she had just given him the very words his heart had been searching for. His lips trembled, but he didn't speak. He only nodded slowly, as if her words were stitching themselves into the deepest part of him. Evelyn squeezed his hands gently, her voice steadier now. I don't know what Claire will say. I don't know if she'll choose you. But I do know this you must tell her, because the ache of rejection fades. But the ache of never trying, that stays forever. Daniel lowered his head, his shoulders shaking with quiet emotion. Evelyn let him have his silence, let him feel what he needed to feel. For a moment, she saw not just her grandson, but the echo of herself young, in love, afraid, and uncertain. Only this time, she had a chance to pass on the wisdom she had carried too long. When he finally lifted his head again, there was something different in his eyes. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was courage beginning to form. You're right, he whispered. I can't keep wondering. I need to tell her, even if it breaks me. Evelyn smiled softly, though her chest ached. That's all any of us can do. Speak the truth and let love answer in its own way. The room grew quiet after that, the clock ticking steadily on the wall. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, scattering a few leaves across the porch. For Evelyn, the silence wasn't empty, it was full, heavy with understanding. She knew Daniel's journey was only beginning, and she knew she couldn't walk it for him. But she had given him what she could, her story, her truth, her strength. As the evening sun dipped low and painted the sky in muted shades, Daniel stood. He leaned down and hugged her tightly, his arms holding her as if he never wanted to let go. Thank you, Grandma, he whispered. I don't think anyone else could have understood. Evelyn held him close, her heart swelling with both love and sorrow. Go, Daniel. Speak your heart. Whatever happens, know you're not alone. When he left, the house grew quiet again. She sat at the table, staring at the fading light through the window. Her thoughts drifted back to Michael, to the love she had never confessed in time. A small part of her still wondered what her life might have been if she had spoken sooner. She had been brave enough to say the words her heart had carried for so long. But tonight, as she thought of Daniel, she felt a strange peace. Perhaps it wasn't too late, not for her, but for him. Perhaps her silence had been a lesson, and her grandson's courage would be her redemption. And so, with a quiet smile and tears in her eyes, Evelyn whispered into the stillness of her kitchen, Go find your truth, Daniel. Don't make the same mistake I did, for the first time in many years. Her heart felt lighter, as though love's story was still being written not in her life, but in the life of the young man she loved more than anything.